Dante's Divine Comedy is one of the most influential and dense works of poetic literature in the Western tradition, indeed the entire world. Building off of Homer and Virgil, and influencing the likes of Chaucer, Milton, Blake, and Tennyson, as well as bringing to popular consciousness and form the modern Italian language, as well as popular artistic depictions of hell and heaven, Dante's epic delves into the meaning of allegory, poetry, love, truth, and philosophy. Dante's poetry rests on the classical presumptions of the human being. Earthly love does have divine or transcendent character and quality to it, and we'll return to that at the end of this lecture. Moreover, following from the Christian theological tradition, which Dante is part of and naturally extols, it is the first love of temporal reality that we encounter in life, that we must then properly understand and then order in order to move toward the permanent reality of the good, the true, and the beautiful. The Divine Comedy is a rich text. It expects a command of the classics, which would have been commonplace in the early Renaissance period when Dante was writing, especially to the literate crowd of his day. The stories of Homer and Virgil, of the Greek philosophic tradition, and of course of the Christian philosophical and theological traditions as well. All of that Dante assumes his readers at least have a basic competency in. It also explores the heart of Christian philosophy in how hell is constructed, the role of love in salvation, and how miserableness, a life overwhelmed in and by sin, is transcended to a life of blissful happiness, which is what salvation is in Christianity. Admittedly, the poem is ripe with all types of allegories, many layers. It deals with the allegory of the political, it deals with philosophy, it deals with theology, it deals with history, it deals with politics, it deals with Dante's own poetic criticism, his ranking and understanding of the poets down from Hesiod and Homer up to his own time. As such, I can only explore a few of the major themes within the Divine Comedy, starting with the Inferno, and help to give an explanation and a context to what readers are reading and encountering. And we're going to focus on three of the most important themes within the Divine Comedy. Understanding the construction and symbolism of hell, dealing with the Inferno. Dante's relationship with Virgil, Statius, and Beatrice, thus permitting us to have an understanding of the entire movement of the poem, from the Inferno to the Purgatorio to Paradiso, and then finally the political philosophy embedded within the work, which will principally cover the Inferno, but allow us to have a roadmap for understanding the political dialogues and the allegories that we find in Purgatorio and Paradiso. To understand Dante's construction of hell, we must first understand some basic things about Christian theology. In Christian theology, God is understood as love and truth. This is important to know when exploring and understanding the 9 circles of hell, and especially the separation between the first 4 or 5 circles and then the final layer of hell within the city of Dis, the final 4 circles, as we move into that chaotic, disorderly, and treacherous city which dominates the lowest rungs of the Inferno. Furthermore, Christian anthropology asserts that man has a purpose, a telos, and that telos is to live a life of union with truth, wisdom, and love. Our human nature can discern the realities of truth, wisdom, and love, and then live in accord with truth, wisdom, and love. This is what is meant by living accord with God's will. Without knowing truth, which is impossible without reason or wisdom, then one cannot properly love. Without this, one cannot live a truly fulfilled, joyful, and happy life, which is what human nature seeks. Thus, knowing, the process of coming to knowledge through our rationality, through our wisdom, leads us to the twin realities of the nature of God, love and truth. As Dante and Virgil approach the gates of hell, they see the now infamous words, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." The reason for this motto is rather simple. The reason why there is no hope in hell is because hell is ultimately timeless, just like how heaven, mind you, is timeless. And do ignore the usage of rising and setting suns in the poem. It is not Dante making a mistake. He uses the time of day and night in his narrative as a poetic device to communicate messages to the reader. Time, mind you, also has to exist for Dante the Pilgrim because he is not technically dead like the rest of the figures that he meets. So he is this very unique character insofar that he penetrates and journeys into timeless reality in order to tell us timeless truths. But he uses the devices of time, rising and setting suns, darkness and light, in order to communicate that timeless poetic reality. When Dante and Virgil enter hell, they meet the first group of people known as the neutrals. The neutrals are people who did not side with good or evil in their lives or in times of crisis, which demand action, which demand choosing. In a time of crisis, you cannot and ought not sit on the sideline. As such, neither heaven nor hell can take them because they didn't choose the good, the true, or the beautiful, which would have put them on the path to heaven, nor did they actually in any meaningful way choose the privation of the good, the true, or the beautiful, which is what evil is, and therefore they cannot actually be condemned to hell. Here they are stung by bees and other insects that cause them to run and scatter about. Do you get it? Dante is trying to be funny here, and mind you, the Divine Comedy is filled with these funny, ironic moments. By being stung by bees and other insects, the neutrals are being forced into action. They are being moved into the movement that they themselves did not embrace during their lives. And thus, they actually become what they should have become in their earthly lives. As such, their movement comes together behind a banner, symbolizing a leader or a lead, something again which they never did in life. Although there are 9 circles to hell, there are, in practicality, only 8 circles, and we're going to understand why this is. The first circle of hell is Limbo. Some of you who are Christian, especially Catholics, may understand or may have a knowledge of this idea of limbo, which Dante and Virgil reach after crossing the river Acheron, the mythical Greek river that led to the underworld in the Greek mythological tradition. No one is being punished here in limbo. Limbo is where all the so-called righteous pagans are located. These souls, including some notable Islamic philosophers, are those people who, though not Christian, had achieved the earthly cardinal virtues during their lives. At the same time, they did know God, which is to say they did not lie. They did know God, which is to say they lived to the best of their ability to the standard of truth, who is God, and they tried to love in accord with the reality of God's will. Therefore, they are neither punished, for they lived good, wholesome, earthly lives, but they are denied the beatific vision, true joy, Because even though they lived by the earthly truth that God has revealed to all through the soul and through natural creation, they were, admittedly, not Christian. But the light of Limbo is the light of the human intellect, from the many noble and intelligent souls that find themselves in this circle. Again, the Islamic philosophers, the great Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, and also the poets, Hesiod, Homer, Ovid, and so many more. As Virgil describes, when Jesus descended into hell, known as the harrowing of hell in the Christian tradition, he brought out of hell the Jewish patriarchs and the other Old Testament saints, prophets, and heroes, and ushered them as the first fruit of heaven. Many of the souls in Limbo, as mentioned, include famous Greek and Roman poets and philosophers, literary and historical figures. We find Julius Caesar, Aeneas, Ovid, Lucan, Electra, Homer, Hesiod, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Seneca, the Islamic philosophers, Averroes, Avicenna, and the great Islamic Sultan and General, Saladin. These are people who were either intellectually brilliant and therefore sought to live a life in accord to the truth accessible to them by natural reason, and who therefore mastered the cardinal virtues in life. Yet the cardinal virtues are not enough to bring about eternal joy. They're enough to make you happy for the day. They're enough to make you happy before you die. But they're not the bridge to the eternal truth that is loving happiness. Which is why, of course, these souls are denied that eternal joy. But not having directed their loves to the wrong things as the rest of the souls in hell are, they are therefore left unpunished. Life in Limbo, as we see, is social. It has vegetation and light. It is like life on earth, for that is the life that these figures lived, the good life on earth. And so Limbo is, for them, the good life on earth. It is envisioned as the best possible realm that these earthly great men actually dreamt of and actually came to know and to teach and to communicate. And this is what begins our journey into the Inferno, where what you loved becomes the destiny of your soul. Because these virtuous souls sought the virtuous earthly life, they become exactly that. They are rewarded with a virtuous earthly life. That is Limbo. I also want to draw our attention, again, to the nature and the construction of Limbo, which is quite important for us to understand as we proceed deeper into the realities of hell. It has light and vegetation. The souls here are conversing with each other in peace without violence. Dante describes Limbo as a great city with shining light and high walls, a splendid castle, and sweetly flowing water. As he ends Canto 4, he remarks, "Leaving Limbo, I come into a place where no light is." The transformation of light to darkness is an allegory of knowledge. Light equals knowledge, and darkness equals the lack of knowledge. And it also has a major allegorical motif found in the Bible. Light equates to God, and darkness equates to Satan and the demons, who we are going to see as we proceed into the lower rungs of hell. Lastly, as Dante is entering hell proper, his face changes complexion to symbolize his movement from light and life in Limbo to darkness and death. The remaining circles of hell also are going to have very different environments, have a very different political description to them in comparison to Limbo. Dante, in many ways, is also exploring the same question Plato explored in the Republic. What kind of city do we live in? Dante relates the type of city we live in based on what kind of loves and truths we hold and reject in life. And so, moving out of limbo, we now enter the first circles of hell. Moving beyond limbo, we enter the second circle of hell, where people are finally being punished for their sins, and a place where there is no more light. It is important to know that in Christian tradition, and by Christian I am referring to Catholic here, since Dante was Catholic, sin was understood as misdirected love, which corresponds with having lived by standards of falsity or half-truths and lies. It is not so much that they are being punished per se, but it follows from the Christian anthropological insight of becoming what you love. Again, just as in limbo, our souls here became what they loved, they became what they preached and sought during their earthly lives, so too is this now true in all the circles of hell. Every soul in the 2nd through 9th circles are what they had become in their earthly life. So by living a life of falsity, humans will be miserable and not live contented and happy lives because they were persuaded to live by a false reality. They lived by lies. That is what all the circles of hell entail. In some way, there is either a half-truth, a misleading truth, or an outright lie that the characters whom Dante meets relate to him so that we understand why it is that they are in the various circles that they're in. These souls in the 2nd through 5th circles of hell, existing outside the walls of the horrendous city of Dis, do not suffer the worst punishments, which of course reside in the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th circles. For at least the souls in the circles 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, they at least loved something, even if that love was ultimately wrong. You have in the 2nd circle the love of lust, and then the love of gluttony, and then the love of mammon, money, and then finally in the 5th circle, the love of conflict and wrath. The 2nd circle contains all the lustful souls who lusted after other people. Dante here is very much the Augustinian. Those who are familiar with Augustine will see Augustinian themes and tropes employed all throughout Dante's poem. The lustful souls were those who were merely in love with the idea of love, to quote Augustine from the Confessions. That is, they chased after love, something that is, properly speaking, good, but they never knew what love was. Therefore, they did not know God, who is love, who is the author of love, and whom, in coming to know, sanctifies the earthly loves that we have. In the 2nd circle, the love of other humans transforms that love into a form of idolatry. The other becomes the idol upon which you sought fulfillment in life. And that, of course, is not going to provide you fulfillment in life. For you cannot love a mortal nature and find immortal reality. Rather than loving another human through God, finding God in other people, which is the proper order of love according to Christianity, these souls caused great ill to themselves and others through their lustful pursuit of others. They were, in fact, otherizing and objectifying other images of God instead of seeing them as images and bearers of God, containing within them the divine love that brings us eternal happiness. The 2nd circle where these souls are whipped about in an uncontrollable whirlwind, also represents and symbolizes how lustful desires take control of a soul, and the soul, the rational intellect, cannot have any tranquility and peace when it is dominated and consumed by this reality. Just as human love, which is again not the same as divine love when you ignore the reality of God, cannot satisfy the desires of souls, the souls being whipped about in the windstorms are controlled by their desires, represented by the wind, which they have no ability to control. They are at the mercy of this wind. They are at the mercy of their lustful desire. The message here is simple. Your soul has been taken captive by erotic desire, and you are now enslaved to your lustful passions. You have no liberty over it. Rather than the soul ordering desire to the proper objects of love, your desire enslaved your soul, and your desire ended up running amok. In the second circle, Dante and Virgil meet one of the famous lovers, a pair of lovers, in the Inferno, and especially the young woman Francesca, who in her love for Paolo was wrecked into this lustful guilt, and their love, though they speak of it to Dante, can never now consummate, because again, they stripped God from each other, and they saw each other as the idols to live by. And so they are embracing each other, but incapable of actually loving each other, which is exactly what their lives were like on earth. And yet, in this encounter, two very important things happen in the dialogue. One, Francesca refuses to accept the reality. She refuses to accept responsibility for her own sin. She blames others. And it is in blaming others, in refusing to take responsibility for one's sins, that causes one to end up in hell. Just like how God came before Adam after he and Eve ate of the fruit in the Garden of Eden, and Adam blamed God and blamed Eve, therefore not taking responsibility for his actions. Thus, we see this repeated by Francesca in the Inferno. And yet, importantly, as it relates to Dante, Dante has compassion, he has pity, and he has mercy on Francesca. And this is going to become very important because just as Dante, as he journeys with Virgil through the Inferno, through hell, tells us that those who deny responsibility for their sins are therefore properly placed in hell, he is also telling us that we must still have pity and compassion and mercy, even unto sinners, if we are not going to be dragged into their world. It is because Dante is going to learn the virtue of Christian charity, of love of others, of mercy, and especially forgiveness. That is what is going to allow him to actually escape the Inferno. The third circle contains the gluttonous souls who deformed their natures through their gluttony. In this circle, Dante is unable to make out the souls because of their deformed natures. Furthermore, gluttonous souls cannot enjoy their true nature or the true nature of the world, beauty, light, tranquility, which is represented through the darkness, the constant darkness, the rain, the lack of light, which distorts them and their environment, making them unrecognizable and making the environment in which they are stuck miserable. Again, the environment and this little world of the gluttonous souls stands in a very stark contrast to the light, the sun, the flowers, the water, the vegetation of Limbo. The beautiful world which we were all once part of is denied to the gluttonous, who transformed and debased their own nature, their bodily nature, and therefore cause the debasement of the world around them. Moving on to the fourth circle, we meet the souls who loved greed. Mammon has long been considered the root of evil, for it represented the debasement of the soul away from transcendent things to only material things, since money is simply a material good. Dante describes Plutus, the mythical god of wealth in the Greek tradition, as mankind's arch enemy. When we enter the fourth circle, the canto opens with gibberish speech. This will become a growing theme as Dante and Virgil descend deeper into hell where truth does not exist, and speech meant to communicate truth becomes slurred and harder to understand as a result of this lacking of truth. And Dante is also making a linguistic point here. If you can't understand somebody, that's because they're a sophist. They use language as a form of rhetoric to obscure the truth. So when you're listening to people and you don't understand them, that's because they're not actually communicating any truth to you. And Dante is implying that as we enter the fourth circle of hell. How gibberish speech, that the speech we cannot understand, is ruining souls and leading them further into the realities of hell. The souls are condemned here to carry heavy stones in this circle, representing how one's great prize in earthly life, what they sought after, the power of wealth, becomes a burden in the afterlife. What was thought of as one's great possession in the earth and the instrument of liberation and advancement and power on earth now enslaves the soul, hence why the souls here are enslaved by their love of wealth and weighed down by stones that correspond with their relative wealth that they had achieved on earth. They enslaved themselves during their earthly lives by not knowing that money ought to serve the poor and to help the homeless, the hungry, the needy, etc. They enslaved themselves in their earthly lives for the pursuit of wealth, and so now they have become exactly that. Just as the gluttons sought after the gluttonous life on earth, and so they are, again, the paradox of, do we understand hell as either the reward or the punishment for what you sought in life? Again, in some ways, it's both. We read these as punishments, but for the soul in hell, they simply are what they had become during their earthly lives. Rather than use their wealth for good, charity, collective improvement, these souls hoarded their wealth for themselves and therefore were entirely self-absorbed. The meaning of this circle is now fairly straightforward. Wealth cannot provide meaning in your life. It is not the satisfaction that your soul seeks. This can be abstracted further to argue that material goods can never satisfy what the soul seeks. You always chase after more things, just as these souls sought after more and more and more material goods. The pursuit of wealth for the sake of wealth destroys the world, it destroys communities, and it ultimately destroys man himself. As Dante and Virgil now sail over the river Styx to the city of Dis, they sail upon the fifth circle of hell, where all the souls who loved wrath and conflict and war are found. The souls are locked in eternal struggle with other souls as reflective of what they loved: wrath, rage, war, conflict, struggle. Again, what you loved in your earthly life corresponds with what your soul will be doing in whatever circle of hell it finds itself. Because these souls thrived and lusted after conflict and wrath on earth, they receive that reward or that punishment in hell. Throughout the journey, Dante includes various Greek and Roman heroes and gods, and here we see it again too. It's a world in which Dante is trying to draw our attention to the stories of the past so that we can understand the good, the true, and the beautiful in those poems and in those stories, but also recognize their shortcomings, what was untrue and what was false in those stories. One of the notable souls that Dante meets here is also a fellow Florentine. It is not just the mythological heroes and gods whom we meet in Dante's Inferno. It is also real-life historical individuals. He meets a wrathful partisan, Filippo Argenti, who lived a life of conflict and vengeance while alive in Italy and is forever cast down into hell to live out a life of conflict and wrath, those things he sought when he was alive on earth. Whereas the lustful loved objects for sexual gratification, and the gluttonous loved objects that ultimately deformed their nature, and the money chasers sought after material goods to try and satisfy their heart's desires, these souls here in the fifth circle of hell, the circle of wrath, these souls sought strife to find meaning in their lives, hence why they are cast into the river Styx, where perpetual conflict and wrath is found. They receive exactly what they sought after. In the Catholic theological tradition, God, technically speaking and properly understood, does not condemn anyone to hell who has not already chosen it for themselves on account of their free will. A soul becomes what it loves, as mentioned, and so hell simply corresponds with what one loved in life. And since the soul becomes that in life, and since the soul is immortal, it must go to the state of what it loved in the afterlife. By loving the things themselves, rather than being able to see God through the things sinners loved, they slowly drifted away from truth, became controlled by desire alone. Here, the desire of wrath and rage, leading to conflict, strife, and struggle. Something to take note of in Dante's journey is that, again, in his conversations, the people he converses with, they never take responsibility for their actions. They always blame someone else for their choices. When we first encountered this again with Francesca, perhaps again the most famous of Dante's early encounters, she defends her carnal lust by expressing it in the language of love. An obvious corruption of love, to be sure, because she wasn't able to see God in Paolo and just ended up making Paolo into her God. And so too, the souls in wrath, as we learn, they made wrath, they made rage, they made war and struggle their God. They refuse to take any responsibility for their actions, for the death, the destruction, the brutality that they inflicted upon others. Entering the latter half of hell, we transition from sins, which were marred by that misdirected love, to the outright rejection of fundamental and universal truths. Heresy is the first layer within the walls of the city of Dis. And heresy is not here simply Christian heresy, but heresy to the universal truths that could be known to all, such as the reality of God and the immortality of the soul. The circles of hell to be found within the walls of Dis are again the sixth circle, heresy, which is the willful rejection of truth. The seventh circle, violence done to others, self, and God, including the creation. The eighth circle, fraud, and non-malevolent betrayal. We'll try to understand a little bit about what Dante means here by non-malevolent betrayal. For it is in the ninth circle we reach intentional betrayal and treachery. A treachery and a betrayal rooted in the rejection of the universal truths of love and what love is all about. The most notable figure that is found in the sixth circle of hell is the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who, if you know something about the history of philosophy, you would have been curious to note that he wasn't included among the Greek and as well as the Roman philosophers who were found in Limbo. Various Greek luminaries were in Limbo, those who we study in any course or degree in classical philosophical studies. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Thales, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Heraclitus, Zeno, philosophers from Rome like Cicero and Seneca. We met all of them in Limbo. Yet, the inclusion of Epicurus in the circle of hell is interesting. And it's because Epicurus rejected two basic universal truths that his fellow Greek philosophers knew and tried to live by: the reality of absolute truth, as well as the immortality of the soul. Epicurus was one of the first epistemological relativists in charging that there was no standard of universal and absolute truth to seek and to live by. Instead, one should just live a life of hedonistic pleasure, because humans are nothing more than mere material bodies. Thus, he also denied the immortality of the soul. In denying absolute truth, and in denying the immortality of the soul, Epicurus is the arch-heretic, because he and his philosophy denies the very universality of philosophy and theology found in Plato and Aristotle, in Christianity and Islam, and so forth. Those who follow Epicurus will necessarily reject all truth wherever it is found. And here I want to point out again one of the great moments of literary irony in the Inferno. The Epicureans, in denying the immortality of the soul and believing everything to be matter, see the purpose of human life as self-centered bodily pleasure before entering the grave. Where are the Epicureans? And where do they all rest? Their immortal souls, which they denied, are entombed forever in graves, which is exactly what they said was going to happen to humans. What a fitting punishment! That this is deliciously ironic, all things considered. Furthermore, they said, before we die, we will enjoy the company of conversation. Yet in being walled up in tombs, buried in the ground, they cannot actually enjoy that pleasure of conversation. And so there is a great moment of literary irony here, because Dante, in placing them in the circle of hell, in having them entombed into the ground, he does two things simultaneously. He gives the Epicureans exactly what they said they sought, what they wanted, what they desired, what they thought human life was ultimately moving towards: death and burial in a grave. And yet he also denies them the reality of blessed conversation with friends, because they denied the reality of eternal happiness. And so that is denied to them here in the sixth circle of hell. Dante also allows Virgil to admonish Dante by bringing up Aristotle. Aristotle had always been a very important and foundational philosopher in Christianity, especially now when we're in the Renaissance period, having moved beyond the inclusion of Aristotle into Christian theology in the scholastic age. Aristotle argued that when the soul imitated nature, it was perfected. The Epicureans, in denying the soul and arguing that humans should act opposite of nature, become a corrupt shell of humanity. The Christian, who imitates nature, is ultimately perfected, and the true nature of everything is love. This is at the heart of Catholic natural theology, which Dante also studied and strongly promoted in his life. Dante had joined the Franciscan order in his lifetime. And so, because the Epicureans denied two basic truths, the result of Epicurean philosophy, Dante warns us, through the use of Aristotle, is that the Epicurean philosophy will lead to the destruction and death of the human endeavor, because that is what Epicurean philosophy sees as the ultimate end of the human endeavor. This is also importantly prefiguring what the rest of the journey through hell, through the 7th, 8th, and 9th circles of hell, will entail. Only those who have a full knowledge of the philosophical and political and theological traditions up to Dante can begin to fully appreciate the poem's depth and intricacy. And hopefully here you can start to see that when you know a little bit more about the history of philosophy and the history of theology, Dante can actually be quite amusing, ironic, and funny. He is giving us some amusing moments, some moments of commedia, of comedy, of happiness, of joy, of laughter, even though we are in the jaws of hell. The 7th circle is divided into 3 subdivisions: violence done to others, self, and to God and creation. The journey of Dante and Virgil through the 7th circle contains some vividly bloody and memorable scenes, like when the bush Giacomo de Sant'Andrea hid and was subsequently torn apart by from the demons pursuing him, or when a poor thorn bush had a branch snapped off by Dante and blood spurted out onto the ground. The bush started weeping as it bled. The imagery of the 7th circle is bloody and haunting and intends to move the reader to weep with the souls trapped in this circle. Again, this is part of Dante's inclusion of how it is important for us to emphasize, to empathize, to sympathize, to have charity, to have mercy, compassion, and pity, even unto sinners. We should never gloat at the sufferings of others. We should never gloat at the misery of others, for that is not what our nature is supposed to be. Again, our human nature, to be made in love, in the image of God, to be made in the image of love. We are supposed to love. And so even in hell, Dante, through himself, is teaching us that though we are in the midst of sinners, we must have pity, compassion, and mercy unto them. The message being communicated, therefore, in the 7th circle is that though the men who are here have trapped themselves into the vicious cycle of degradation and destruction, we can still sympathize with them. As man leaps to his own death, in which he also brings about the destruction of creation at the same time, seen here in the 7th circle, when we meet deformed nature, man and tree, man and bush, man and creation, now contaminated together as one ugly, brutal, non-beautiful reality. Though this is the reality that we're in, Dante still weeps with those he finds. And so not only is Dante trying to teach us here in the 7th circle that we must have pity and compassion upon sinners, he is also telling us something equally very important: how man's own death and destruction has a double reality. Our misery, our death, and our destruction also entails the destruction of creation, the destruction of nature. Man is not separate from creation. Man is part of creation. Again, we see this in the imagery, in the symbols of man being fused with tree, man being fused with bush. The fall and the violence of men will have consequences to the entire created world. This is premised from the Christian reading of the fall of man. Part of the fall of man in Christianity is man's estrangement from creation. Hence, man takes a domineering and destructive attitude toward the natural world, which is something, properly speaking, beautiful, and, when rightly understood, is an icon and an image, a symbol, directing man to God in its beauty and majesty. Here we find nature in the seventh circle, decrepit, destroyed, and dying. St. Paul wrote in Romans that creation groans for its restoration when the sons of men are glorified, implying that creation will become majestic and glorified through man's sanctification because man will have restored his stewardship relationship with nature. Until that day, however, man brings about his own demise, which has unintended consequences of destroying the natural world too. Thus, violence against the self, suicide, violence done against others, violence done against God, because God created you and you are made in the image of God, leads to the destruction of the cosmos and of the natural world. The seventh circle embodies the rejection of man being made in the image of God. Remember again, here in the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th circles, we have the rejection of certain fundamental truths, beginning with Epicurus and the Epicurean philosophy, which rejects the reality of universal truth and the reality of the immortality of the soul. And so now here in the 7th circle, man is rejecting being made in the image of God, the rejection that all life is sacred and should not be willfully destroyed writ large, and that the rejection of God himself, through blasphemy, the final of the 3 layers here in the 7th circle, does irredeemable harm not merely to the self, but to the world. I should note that it is here that Dante is also playing creative games with numerology. As we are approaching the darkest and deepest level of hell, thus getting closer to the pure rejection of the good, the true, and the beautiful, we begin to see a corrupt parody of the Trinity in the 7th circle, with 3 layers within this circle, which are all related to some sort of rejection of God, who is, again, truth and love. The transformation of humans into plants and other natural objects of the world also reflects the fall of the human soul, from being a rational and intellectually seeking force, which transforms man to being like God, now to being like a vegetable. In rejecting the truth and the goodness of life, man becomes a beast and a vegetable in the process. It is man who was formed in the image of God, bestowed within him the gift of rationality, which is what the soul is, and the gift of love, which is what the heart is. And in rejecting the soul, again, like Epicurus, in rejecting the ability to love others by doing harm to self and to others, we become vegetables and beasts in the process. Men reject their created state of being as an image of God and thereby private and destroy their rationality and their ability to love. They become pure id. They are nothing but self-centeredness and desire, and they lose the beautiful form, the beautiful body that they once were. The 8th circle of hell has within it the city of Malebolge, and Bolgia's total 10 ditches. An imperfect number, continuing on this symbolic and allegorical theme of numerology, that does not match up with the 9 circles of hell, because there can be no symmetry or proportion or order in hell, since hell is something imperfect. Within the 8th circle are all the souls who caused division, strife, and discord, were only interested in themselves and didn't live to care for others. They betrayed the love and trust of others, again, because they were merely interested in themselves, in their own self-promotion, but in their own desire of self-promotion, they avoid, at least according to Dante, that intentional and malevolent betrayal, which is reserved for the ninth circle. Here we also find hypocrites, politicians. It's going to be a lot more people in hell today now because of just how expansive politics is. Sorcerers, and all the other people who can be broadly characterized as frauds. So Dante, mind you, who lived 700 years ago, was basically already onto something that many of us feel today about our politicians. That our politicians are mostly cheats, liars, scoundrels, and frauds. Yeah, Dante kind of saw that too. He places all the politicians down here in the eighth circle of hell. The sin of fraudulence represents the continuation, of course, of the decline of truth. In this circle, the truth of trust of others is destroyed because of a false presentation. Not being truthful in presenting yourself is what is rejected. And so again, Dante thinks that this entails not actually being malevolent, because it wasn't so much, according to Dante's ethic of intentionality, that you were deliberately trying to mislead others. It was that you deliberately just misinterpreted, had a mispresentation of yourself. You lied to yourself. You lied about who you were to yourself, and thus went into the world as the embodiment and the incarnation of fraud. Jason, the Greek hero, is the most famous mythological hero who represents this. Jason, interested in his elevation to kingship more than anything else, thus betrayed the love and the trust of others. Again, so this is a self-centered fraud, a reflection of the Augustinian principle of the incurvatus in se, the inward curve to the self, that foreshadows and prefigures the more extreme version of self-centered fraud that is contained in the ninth circle. And this is important to recognize when continuing our reading of the descent into hell. We started with misdirected love. Now we have the rejection of love coming about through the rejection of truth. With the rejection of love comes the loss of truth. Hell is becoming a loveless place as Dante and Virgil proceed further through it. No more misdirected love, as was in the second, third, fourth, and fifth circles. Only the love of self is found here, which leads humanity and the world onto the path of betrayal and the eventual path of destruction. Narcissus, the quintessential embodiment of self-love, is also found here in the eighth circle. The love and want of glory for only oneself betrays humanity's social, relational, loving nature, the love that truly defines us as human beings. Additional figures in the eighth circle include prominent church figures, including various popes, all of whom are guilty of having betrayed the trust of their public offices for self-gain. In Catholic theology, God entrusts stewardship to the clergy. But Catholic theology also maintains that the church is a mixed body of saints and sinners, which includes the clergy. In fact, early Christian tradition asserted, like with John Chrysostom, that hell was paved with the skulls of clergy, meaning that most of the wicked sinners within the church are ironically clergymen. Nonetheless, God does not abandon his church, which is the body of believers, as per Psalm 88, or Psalm 89 in the Protestant Bible. Other famous figures in the eighth circle who betray the public trust, and through their works and actions brought about strife and schism as a result of their separation, the strife, schism, the conflict, the betrayal of public trust, include Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest who had Jesus brought to trial, and the prophet Muhammad. A note as to why Muhammad is in the eighth circle, whereas certain Islamic philosophers, theologians, and rulers were in limbo, is because early Catholicism regarded Islam as a sort of heretical form of Christianity. For those who know some things about Islamic theology, Jesus is the ultimate prophet. He was born of the Virgin Mary. He will come again to defeat the forces of evil and sin, preside over the final judgment, and bring the good, the saintly, and the righteous into the kingdom of heaven. Sounds pretty close to Christianity, right? And you'd be correct. However, Islam denies that Christ is the Logos. Instead, the law, Sharia, is what brings about human happiness through submission to the law rather than finding love, wisdom, and truth in other human beings, i.e., seeing Christ in others. Because there is some closeness to the religions of Christianity and Islam, Christianity, again, early Catholicism, regarded Islam as a sort of heretical sect, with teachings similar to Christianity, but ultimately rejecting Christianity. And what is actually very interesting is when the armies, the Arab armies, were moving into the Levant, when they were moving into the Holy Land, which in the 7th century was predominantly Christian, Christian monks and bishops wrote, we have surviving records as early as the 630s, just a couple years removed from Muhammad's death. You have Christian clergymen writing about how Muhammad and his teachings are a heresy of Christianity. And this is what Dante picks up here, and why he has Muhammad in the 8th circle, but why other Muslims like Salahuddin, Averroes, and Avicenna are in limbo. Another one of the more memorable scenes through the journey through hell is how many of the souls in the 8th circle have their nature changed by the snake pit. This is symbolic of fraud. Someone presents themselves in one nature, seemingly good and pure and intelligent. However, they are deceitful liars. Thus, the change in their appearance, the change of their nature, is when they are bitten by snakes. Dante is again laying extensive allegory on his readers. But this would have been known to the readers of his time, who read the Bible allegorically, who understood the reality of typological and allegorical hermeneutics. Dante is borrowing from this allegorical and typological interpretive tradition found within Catholic theology and utilizing it for his purposes here in the Divine Comedy. Entering the 9th and final circle of hell, we finally meet Lucifer himself, who is chewing on the bodies of Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. The other souls in the 9 circles are also all traitors. Treachery is considered the worst sin in Catholic theology because it is the ultimate betrayal of basic truths that only occurs with malevolent intent on the part of the perpetrator. It is the betrayal and the rejection of love itself. Because those who betray their family are guilty of rejecting the love due to family. This was something known, mind you, to the Greeks and the Romans, who are commended by Dante in Limbo for their virtue, again, the cardinal virtues. This is also contained in the 10 Commandments: honor your father and mother, love them. The betrayal of earthly parents is also symbolic of humanity's betrayal of their heavenly parents. This is all interlinked in Dante's mind. You also have the betrayal of friends, the betrayal of spouses, the betrayal of countrymen. You have, in the 9th circle, not merely the final rejection of just truth in some abstract metaphysical sense. You have the rejection of what truth points us to, what truth embodies, which again is love, because God is love, and as Augustine said, love is divine. In rejecting the love of friends, in rejecting the love of parents, in rejecting the love of brothers and sisters, in rejecting the love of king and country, the traitors here in the ninth circle turn their back on love itself. And so we now reach the frozen lake, because the frozen lake is the ultimate symbol of the coldness of the human heart, where love itself has extinguished, has died. Again, in the second through fifth circles, we encountered misdirected love. Love, in some weird sense, kinda still existed. We didn't have a proper understanding of it, yet it kinda still existed. And so now here in the ninth circle, however, in rejecting love itself as the final consummation of the rejection of truth itself, we enter the cold, dark, frozen lake, where Lucifer is a corrupt parody of the Trinity with his three heads, each representing a different member of the Trinity, and the colors, black, yellow, and red, symbolizing ignorance, impotence, and hatred. Ignorance is the opposite of wisdom, impotence the opposite of omnipotence, and hatred the opposite of love. And so each also corresponds with a person of the Trinity. Wisdom, Christ; omnipotence, the Father; and love, the Holy Spirit. Judas, Brutus, and Cassius are the three souls being chewed on by Lucifer, because for Dante and Latin Christianity, having sprung, of course, from Roman culture and history, these three souls represented the worst of traitors. They betrayed their benefactor and God, who is the benefactor of all. Judas betrayed his benefactor and teacher and God, Jesus Christ. Brutus and Cassius betrayed their benefactor, their friend, and their earthly father, Julius Caesar. These men consciously chose to do this. In rejecting family, in rejecting country, and in rejecting God, the ninth circle represents the total and complete collapse of truth, as everyone is turned inward only to themselves, to the point of deliberately and intentionally now betraying one another. As such, there is no love to be shown in this circle of hell. Love of family is non-existent. Love of country is non-existent. Love of others is non-existent. Love of friends is non-existent. Love of God is non-existent. Meaning the love for wisdom is non-existent, as the furthest depth of hell is frozen and dark. There is no light. There is no knowledge. There is no warmth. There is no love here in the final circle of the Inferno. It is only a cold, dark, and interestingly enough, sterile place. Only ignorance and death reign now, for ignorance is what leads to death. Beside Lucifer chewing on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius, another aspect of the ninth circle is how alone it is. Everyone is frozen in place. Lucifer also weeps. All beauty, goodness, and truth that any of these souls may have had at one point in their life is gone. They are sad, sorry parodies of their once noble and beautiful selves. The beautiful and noble Lucifer, who as an angel was the most beautiful of all the angels. The once noble and beautiful men, Judas, who was, in some traditions, the best friend of Jesus. and Brutus and Cassius, once great and noble senators, republicans, friends of liberty, friends of Julius Caesar, especially Brutus, now having betrayed all of that. They are sad, sorry parodies of their once noble and beautiful selves. And this is what happens when you reject love and truth. You die alone. So as Dante and Virgil slip down the body of Satan to enter the other side of the world, because the medievals actually knew the world was round, contrary to popular misconceptions, the Greeks and the Egyptians learned that the world was round. Dante concludes the Inferno by saying, "We climbed, he first and I behind, until, through a small round opening ahead of us, I saw the lovely things the heavens hold, and we came out to see once more the stars." That Dante ends the journey through hell with a return to the light, the stars, which is wisdom, and directs our souls, rational faculties, up to it, transcendence. We leave behind the world of the cold, the dark, and the dead, and re-enter the world of light, warmth, knowledge, and love. The stars represent love and knowledge, the two things needed to understand the order of the world, of life, and how to live. Dante, for the record, poetically ends each of the three books with seeing the stars above, an important symbolic image that humans, head erect and tall, as Augustine explains in The City of God, are meant to gaze at the beauty and the wonder of the cosmos, and through the sacramental reality of the cosmos, be awed by its beauty and love, which point the soul back to God. In understanding Dante's construction of hell, we should take away a few things. That the circles of hell correspond with what we chased after, what we desired, what we loved in earthly life. So at once we can understand this as punishment because we are in hell, yet at another level we can understand this as simply becoming exactly what we desired. We have now become what we loved. That is what is going on when we journey through all the circles of hell. You also have the understanding of hell as constructed by Dante as a place where love and truth are ultimately extinguished. Love and truth evaporate and disappear by the final circle of hell. The only love that is seen as we journey now into the final circle is ultimately the relationship of love between Dante and Virgil. And we're going to talk about that next. And then finally, it's important for us to recognize again that regards Dante, though Dante is journeying through hell, though Dante is meeting sinners, though these sinners are deserving their place in hell, he always has a certain tear of compassion, a tear of mercy for them. For Dante is also communicating to us that if we are to avoid hell, we must not become the callous, the cruel, and the indifferent souls that are the souls in hell.